Ok, da vi tilbake i Skravleklassen, på Skravleklassen. Vi fortsatt i lockdown, korona-lockdown, så vi på Zoom. I dag jeg igjen over dammen. Jeg har med jeg så stolt, jeg vet ikke hvor jeg skal begynne. Jeg har med en kollega fra USA, Laszlo Montgomery, mannen bak China History Podcasten, en av de første podcastene som virkelig slo an, I hvert fall innenfor de temaene jeg interessert I, historie og sånne ting. Han holdt på, jeg skal straks finne ut eksakt hvor lenge han holdt på lenge. Han kan fortelle selv hvor gammel han og hvem han men jeg I hvert fall en ekstremt stor fan, og som jeg sa til han rett før, vi har bare pratet et par minutter, men det jeg digger med den podcasten, for dere som ikke har hørt den, at han kommer ikke så ofte ut, men han har holdt på I hvert fall 10 år, og han snakker I time etter time om kinesisk teens historie, kinesisk poesis historie, kinesisk filosofis historie, selvfølgelig masse om kinesisk revolusjon, Mao, Deng Xiaoping, møter med Nixon, alle disse tingene. Og det bare liksom motgiften til alt vi ser på nett når vi logger på hver dag, og det så helt fantastisk. Jeg sa til han også, ironisk nok så TikTok, den appen som kanskje den det aller mest stikk motsatte av det Laszlo driver med, kinesisk, så det kan kanskje komme inn på, men mannen bak China History Podcast, Laszlo Montgomery. I'm honored to have you on. I'm actually flabbergasted that you even answered me.
Are you
because
kidding?
I sent the mail.
Anytime I get an email from Norway or just any love showed from my Norwegian listeners, I love it. I love your country. You know, so often, you know, we have these things in the United States, they come up with all these different polls. They'll say, you know, best place to retire, best place to live, and, you know, all these things. Well, every time Norway is consistently in these polls, it's the greatest place to live. And I've still never been there.
I'll tell you something
hoping
funny.
To go.
I want you to continue to brag about my country, but actually I have to tell you a sad thing that we dropped 14 or 15 places in the new ranking. Because,
oh, really?
In the new ranking? Yeah, because in the new ranking, I have a new parameters that has to do with climate initiatives and stuff like that. Even though we're good on climate, we produce oil. So just to
you got lots of oil.
We produce oil. It made us drop like to 16th place from like first or second place in many years in a row with Switzerland or Sweden or whatever. But cool that you love Norway. It's cold and cool.
I'm coming. Actually,
there. It was the first.
Coming there.
Yeah, you can sleep at my couch. I don't have. I can make a bed like Mao used to have. What did you call it? Does it have a Chinese name? That flat wooden bed that he always
the kang, the brick bed with the fire underneath.
Yeah. yeah. I can make one.
Don't worry, I'll come in the summer.
Yeah, where do you live? Just let's get this out of the way. Where do you live? And
right, just outside of Los Angeles.
I used to live in Los Angeles in Glendale from 2018.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I'm right. I live right off of the famous Route 66, which is a famous highway in American 50s and 60s history.
I have a tip for you for your podcast, because the last guy in LA I interviewed for my podcast is an author named Tom O'Neill. Have you heard about him? Have you heard about this? Heard his name? He wrote a book about the Manson murders. He spent 20 years writing about the Manson murders. It's called Chaos, and it's about the alleged link between Manson and the CIA. And the book has a lot of references to the intelligence wars between CIA and the Chinese intelligence services since the Korean War. So then I picked up a book written by a woman, I think she's part Korean or 100% Korean, but lives in America, called Monica Kim. She writes about I think it's called The Interrogation Room, about the Korean War and how the Chinese military and Kang Sheng and all of those guys, how they what kind of methods they use to like brainwash, because brainwashing is a Chinese term, right?
Yeah,
China, yeah. So it's about this. And I think it's an untapped theme. I'll send you the link so you can listen to the interview. It's not like directly about China, but he's not like a conspiracy theorist guy. He's an entertainment journalist. Worked for, I think, Variety or Premiere magazine. He's just got this story in his lap about the Manson murders. 30 years anniversary. It was 20 years ago, and he just went down this rabbit hole and discovered this crazy stuff about psychiatrists working for the CIA and how they, and I think a lot of it allegedly comes from like the kind of the race between the Chinese and the Soviets, of course, and the United States intelligence services, like in the race to like find out how we can use the human mind in psychological warfare, and how you can like get an edge in the Cold War. It's really fascinating stuff.
Maybe too edgy. Edge.
Huh?
They're still trying to find an edge in this Cold War.
you find it hilarious that they still try to find new angles to talk about the Cold War.
Yeah, the new Cold War.
Yeah, maybe this is the start of a new Cold War or a new civil war, a new, I don't know. It's depressing what happens in your country.
It's almost over.
Yeah, you're sick and tired of the whole reality show, or whatever you want to call it.
Democracy isn't perfect, and these kind of things can happen. And the past 4 years, I'm sort of glad it happened. The thing that happened the other day at the Capitol, I'm glad that happened, because it had to happen, and I'd like to see, what ultimately, what the result is. And they've arrested something like 80 people already, and we'll see. This isn't over yet. It's it's the same thing in Europe. I talk to my friend in Germany all the time. It's like, he's telling me what it's like on the streets there. I go, it's the same thing here. What can I say? People are people, wherever they are. Some are thin, some are fat. Some
one thing,
the government, and some don't.
And one thing that never goes out of fashion, even for Norwegian political commentators, is to try to draw parallels to Mao. It's like AOC is the new Mao, Trump is the new Mao. The Trump supporters are like the Revolutionary Guard. The progressive leftists are the Revolutionary Guard. Have you picked up on this? Have you?
4 years ago, when things were really starting to just get out of control, I said, I used to tell my friends in China, I said, they'd say, what's going on in your country? I said, we're having our American Cultural Revolution, with Trump as Mao and the MAGA people as his Red Guards. And how Trump, just as Mao in the 60s would just sort of go over the government and just talk straight to the people, through these big rallies, and then the Datsubao, those big character posters, and they're just, it was very similar. It was exactly the same as what President Trump was doing, was just pushing the government out of the way and going straight to his followers. And there were quite a lot of them, not as many followers as Mao had, but it was the same thing. And when you look at the Cultural Revolution and just what they tried to accomplish by just completely transforming society, I think in the American case, they also wanted to transform society, and but not as. It was a little bit too fast for me.
It's uncanny. It's really uncanny because. What? One more time.
our cultural revolution is almost over, and China, when it ended in China in 1976, they went nowhere but up. They had a great comeback, and that's what I think is going to happen in the United States. The whole world got to laugh at us for 4 years, and we look like a bunch of idiots. And you saw all these MAGA chuds on TV, and just really making the country look bad. The extreme right and the extreme left, to me, they're equally contemptible. But I believe that U.S. will have a comeback, and society will be restored, and we can.
But do you think Biden is Deng Xiaoping?
He's not Deng Xiaoping. He's Hua Guofeng.
Yeah.
Just a bookmark. He's just a placemark until we dust. It's going to take time to get up off the ground and dust ourselves off, and get back into the groove. So that's all he is. Because of his age and what he's all about. I call him just sort of a placemark to just allow us over the next 4 years to get back to where we once belonged.
Yeah. And sorry, my Chinese is really not good, but one more time. The guy after Mao, Hua Guofeng?
Hua Guofeng? Yeah, Hua Guofeng.
He was not bad. He was not bad.
Oh, no, not at all. He was Mao's hand-picked successor, and Mao, through his famous utterance, "Ni ban shi, wo feng xin," with you in charge, I could rest at ease. So he was Mao's anointed successor, and all the other ones were either killed or or out of power. And he went along with the arrest of the Gang of Four and sort of calmed things down. And then when everything was ready, then that's when Deng Xiaoping emerged and sort of pushed Hua Guofeng aside. So I look at Joe Biden as a Hua Guofeng type. He's not the answer to, he's not the comeback from Trump. He's just sort of, he's guy's been in politics 30, 40 years. I don't know how long. He's a very establishment politics. I'm not particularly enamored with him, but he's sort of like a grandpa who comes in and just after the kids have destroyed the house, who just kind of comes in and try to clean it up. There's a lot of cleanup that has to be done. And, and with Europe, with China, with a lot of countries, there's a lot of mopping up that needs to be done. And so that's what I think the next 4 years will be about.
Do you see Deng Xiaoping on the horizon? I have a candidate. I wanna pitch it to you, but I want to ask you first. Do you see Xiaoping in the horizon in America?
A Deng Xiaoping?
Yeah.
I don't know. He's sort of a one of a kind type. We don't need a Deng Xiaoping. We're already a developed country. We need a strong political leader that is not too nauseating, and that the left and the right can stand behind. I think what should happen is the center left and the center right in the Republican and Democrat Party should join together as one and leave the fringe on the side and just have three parties. Is I think what should come out of this. I don't know.
My preferred candidate is actually Chinese. Is Andrew Yang.
Oh yeah, I met him. Yeah, I met him.
You met him?
Yeah, it was in Washington D.C. at some event, and he was one of the speakers, and I never heard of him before, and we were all just sort of milling about in between sessions, and he was just standing there milling, people were milling about. He was standing there by himself. I said, "Oh, how you doing?" I introduced myself, and he said, "Yeah, I'm Andrew Yang. I'm running for president." I said, "What? I've never heard of you before." So, but yeah, I totally agree with you. Love that guy.
Did you talk about China, or did he?
Didn't know who he was yet. He was before he spoke. He had just he had a great speech, and so articulate. He's very clear. That's my cat's tail. She wants to join the interview. Get out of here. So yeah, I like him. He's got a future. I think he's going to be Secretary of
Transportation Minister.
Yeah, but he's talking about putting him in his cabinet. But yeah, he's good. I like him.
Okay, but let's leave contemporary politics for now. That's actually what I want to get out of my system. I'm so sick and tired of reading newspapers, and the viewers don't know this, but when I sent you the mail, I sent you the quote from this famous Norwegian philosopher. You remember that about the Tufu? and he said VG, that's the Norwegian daily, whatever, New York Times, like, comes out every day, but in a perfect world it would be the opposite, like the 700th or 600th century poet Tufu would come out every day, and New York Times only once every 1,000 years. That's where I'm right now. So I'm sick and tired of Twitter, and so let's get into the meaty stuff here. What's the China History Podcast, and when did you start it, and why?
I started the China History Podcast, believe it or not. I started listening to podcasts like 2008, 2009 is when it came out before, but it really, 2008, 2009 started to get a little traction. And there were, like Dan Carlin, Mike Duncan. These were the two established, history in the history space, and Lars Brownworth too. These were the best. These were the three. Still the best. The three history podcast true pioneers, and then there was another guy in Kansas City. He was just some high school or junior college teacher, and he had this podcast show called History According to Bob. And, he was like sort of an older guy, like what my age is now. And he just sort of did it from the seat of his pants. And he was just sort of a folksy kind of a guy, and just would come out with all these random topics. And I really loved it. And I listened to him and I said, gee, I could do better than this guy. And it was around 2010. And there really, 2010, no China history out there yet. And I remember I was listening or watching C-SPAN once. Are you familiar with C-SPAN? Yeah. It's like you watch the U.S. government in action. So I was listening to some congressman, it was a senator or whoever it was listening to the ignorance of our elected representatives when they talked about China. And I just thought, boy, one guy's more ignorant than the next. And so why don't I come out with a podcast on Chinese history and just throw it out there and teach Americans, the basics about Chinese history. I'm not an academic. I've been in business for 30-something years in China business. So I thought, well, the China History Podcast, I'll just sort of make a greatest hits of events from Chinese history, all the well-known stuff, and maybe some not so well-known stuff, and I'll just teach it in my. I'm a salesman at heart. I'm a sales and marketing guy. So I said, instead of using your sales and marketing skills to sell made in China junk to the American public, let's sell some Chinese culture, Chinese history. So I started it just in the seat of my pants. I had no idea what I was doing. I'm not a very technical person at all, especially when it comes to a computer. So it was a rough go at the beginning, But I started coming out with all these shows on just different popular topics, and I just kept it going. And all of a sudden, within 6 months or a year, people from all over the world were tuning in. I go, oh shoot, I just meant that for American people. Right now, less than half of my listeners around the world, less than half are in the United States. So it really turned into this international show, and I've always kept it going. And I've always stayed true to my mission. I don't try and sound like some academic. I mean, I'm not the smartest guy in the room, and it sort of walks that I think my greatest accomplishment with the China History Podcast is that I could attract middle schoolers, high schoolers, and just the average person on the street with no background on China. And then I also have, China experts, journalists, people that are very respected in the China expert space, and, who are well-known names. And they listen to my show too. So that I've been able to attract such a wide bandwidth of listeners is really what I'm most proud of as far as the podcast. And some people just don't want to be buried in details, Chinese names. If you don't speak Chinese, a lot of these, it's like Norwegian names. It's like, one after the other. It goes in one ear, goes right out the other. I can't remember those. I can't remember these names. So I just try to make it as simple as possible, but stay true to the history and the story, and not make it sound too simplistic. But some people would just they want to know about some aspect of Chinese history, but they don't want to be buried in details. I always say, some people don't want an 18-course banquet. They're just looking for a grab-and-go meal and something that they could just consume, fills them up and satisfies them, and no indigestion or being overwhelmed.
I want to give you some props, though. First, I want to give you a small bit of critique, because you say the banquet stuff. It's much cooler when you say it in Chinese. Some people want you remember that? How do you say it? Some people want
I forgot. What did I say? I don't remember what I said yesterday.
It's the first sentence in my favorite show. We're going to go deep into your actual shows and talk about them, but my favorite is the history of Chinese philosophy. And the first, maybe not sentence, but the first paragraph, you say, this is not an academic approach to Chinese philosophy. Some people want and you say the main course, and some people want the whole, but you say it in Chinese. It's so cool.
Oh, 一个套餐, like a set course meal.
Yeah.
But
I want to give props also, because I'm a writer. I went to advertisement school and learned about how to write and how to articulate. And I think one of the strengths of the China History Podcast, which I rate your podcast up there with Mike Duncan and Dan Carlin, which I think is one of the still going strong, both of them, even though they're very different. I think your style is very literary. You use a lot of sorry, I would just say something popped up here, irritating. You use a very literary style that attracts me. Is that just something you're born with, or is it?
I don't know, that's a natural way of speaking. I don't transform into a different person. What you hear on the China History Podcast and what you'd hear in normal everyday life, it's the same thing.
Yeah. I love your style of writing, or I don't know if you. I listened to a lot of Mike Duncan talking about, and Dan Carlin, how they actually approach making the show, and it's quite different between the two of them. But what is clear from both of them is a lot of work behind every episode, and I've contemplated sometimes to try to do something like you guys do. I don't think I'm ready for it yet. Maybe it's the age. Maybe I don't know, but it's a lot of work because it's
work. It's a lot of work. But you know something? It's going to be 62 this year. My kids are grown. I work for a company in China, but I have a lot of time on my hands, and this is my hobby. This is my golf. This is my, my fishing. This is the thing that I do in my spare time that gives me great solace. And I'm just love doing the whole process is just thoroughly enjoyable, from the research and note taking to writing the outline and then just turning on the microphone and blast off. It's such I'm so glad I got into this. It's been a great 10 years, 10 and a half years.
Congrats. And how do you pick the themes? I also listened to, the Philosophize This with Stephen West, the guy who goes through the history of Western philosophy. Have you listened to that? He actually says that he just gets 100 mails every day and he just picks themes according to what people want, like almost a direct democracy podcast.
I do that a lot too. I'm getting suggestions for topics, and sometimes I'll say, oh, that's a great topic, and that'll just be the next topic that I do. And I know what I'm doing. Tonight will be the final episode of this history of the Thai Chinese that I've been working on for the past 14 weeks. So tonight I'll conclude that, and I know what I'm doing in 2 weeks from now. But after that, I have no idea. I haven't picked anything out. So I have a long list. Every time somebody gives me a suggestion, I write it down, and so I'll just sort of look at that and go, who should I do next? And that's how it works.
I want to go back to the more ancient China very soon, but I just have to ask you, because I haven't listened to the new series. I saw you had a new series with Chinese-Thai relations. I've lived in Thailand for some time, okay. So I'm just curious about the gist of I've been to China. I went to China first time 16 years ago, and we went back 2 years later in that. School assignment, actually. I went to film school. It's pretty cool to go there to make documentaries as a kid in 2004. And 10 years ago, I lived a bit in Thailand. Actually drug rehab stuff. So just the gist of the relationship. Can you just? I know it's a 7-part series, but what's the gist of the Thai-Chinese relationship?
Having to. Thailand's a very special case in Southeast Asia.
They've never been invaded.
Yeah, outside of China, there are more Chinese in Thailand than anywhere else in the world. So it's got a pretty big Chinese population. And the original people from before recorded history, a lot of them migrated from Southwest China. These they're called Thai people, Tai, and they speak these. Whole bunch of what are called these Thai dialects. There's a brand, it's a language branch. So it's, Thailand, it's just so many of the inhabitants originally are from China and then that have emigrated there over the years. The number is greater than anywhere else in the world. Oh. And they have a very special place in the kingdom as well. Obviously, they've made the most conspicuous achievements are in, commerce and industry, and all that they've done, throughout the centuries to build Thailand, build the economy, and build their political power, and so. And then the Chinese, and it's like this in other countries where Chinese are dominant in the economy, where they become victims of their own success, and the local population, the non-Chinese part of the population will, point at them and say, look at these guys. They look at them compared to us, and they don't assimilate, and they don't do this, and they do that, and so that's the Chinese experience in Thailand has just sort of been a up and down, depending on the political winds at the time. And in the episode that I'm going to upload tonight, part 7. This is pretty much before, during, and after World War II, and it was a real rough ride for the Thai Chinese. But I've known many great people. I'm so impressed with them.
It's Thaksin. Is he Chinese descent?
Thaksin the Great.
Huh?
He's Chinese, or he's half Chinese. His father was.
He's half Chinese. Yeah. So that's maybe some of the problem. At least until now, it hasn't gone the way that it went in Indonesia. Have you made a series about the killings of Chinese in Indonesia?
Ultimately, I'd like to cover the Malaysian Chinese, the Indonesian Chinese, Filipino Chinese, and so on and so forth, and just try to cover all I've done things on the Chinese Mexicans. The next episode on a Chinese American. They got this just great stories, really great stories.
Yeah, because Mexicans now Chinese, they actually they're the ones behind the whole drug trade. If you track it back to the 18th century, 19th century in Mexico, they imported the opium and started the proto cartels, the cartels before the cartels.
Oh, really?
The cartels. Yeah, didn't you know that? I read a book about it because it's a great book. It's called I think it's called it's not Mac Mafia, but something Cartel Inc. or something. It tells the whole backstory about how the Chinese were into illegal booze and marijuana and opium in Mexico, and the locals pushed them out with violence and adopted their methods and made the cartels, basically, 100 years or 50 or 100 years after the Chinese in Mexico. And the ironic thing is that, I don't know if you read it, but the biggest not the biggest drug bust, but the biggest cash bust in Mexico City ever, that's a Chinese guy. You read about that? The Chinese guy was busted in Mexico City with, I think it's the world record of cash inside a dirty cash inside a private house, because he was importing the, what do you call it, the things you make methamphetamine. You have to use some chemicals from China, and that's big business. Yeah, but again, enough about the contemporary stuff. Let's dig into the real history. China, where did it all begin?
Well, where did it all begin? Well, there's recorded history and history that happened before recorded history. I sort of focus. I haven't done anything on Neolithic China yet. Prior to the Shang Dynasty, there's all these different. They call them Wenhua. All these different cultures, this prehistoric cultures that have been all over China and along the Yellow River where China began. But I haven't put too much focus on that yet. It's mostly with recorded history, with the Shang Dynasty, the oracle bones, and how. And then the Zhou Dynasty, where Chinese culture in its form that we recognize really starts to gel. That's the time of Lao Tzu, Confucius, and the 100 schools of thought, and it was also the time of the Buddha in India, Zoroaster over in Persia. It was a great time, 6th century BCE.
You had a word for it, like it's the theory about why Buddha and Zoroaster and all these people lived at the same time. It's like a term.
Yeah.
It's something age. Yeah, I don't remember. So the Shang Dynasty, that's the first big one, right?
The Zhou Dynasty. which is
the
not
Zhou dynasty. Sorry,
which is not an imperial dynasty. Those were kings. That was the classic age of Chinese feudalism. Was in the Zhou dynasty. And, there was the Western Zhou, and then it broke apart and it became the Eastern Zhou, which was divided into the spring and autumn period and the warring states period. And that was the age of Confucius and all those classical philosophers. And China broke apart into a bunch of different kingdoms, and it finally got down to 7, and then it got down to 1, and that was the Qin with Qin Huang, the first emperor, and that's where Chinese imperial history begins, 221 BC.
And that's after Confucius.
After Confucius, several hundred years.
Because let's start with the Zhou dynasty, because you talk about Confucius talking about these 4 emperors, 2 evil ones and 2 good ones. I got really Star Wars vibes when I listened to that. It's to be like Yao, no.
Yeah, Yao, Shun. These were the models that are held up as, the great leaders that you should emulate, and so they were always held up as examples. They were part of the San Huang Wu Di, the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors. This is mythical Chinese history. These 5 are pointed to as, the great ancestors and the most virtuous and the role models for, the rest of the to come.
I love your description about one of them or all of them. They didn't eat. They ate with a wooden spoon. They didn't wear broderies. Do you remember anymore?
Yeah, this is it's like this in the Bible and or any of the religious holy books. I mean, people were supposed to be humble. You were supposed to be humble. You weren't supposed to be flashy. And even today, in our modern day, people say, this guy, he's, look at how he acts, or look how he throws his money around, or what have you. It still goes back to 5,000 years ago when they would when a true the truly good person was humble and they were just they had humility and they were virtuous. And today we still say that's a good person. That's the role model.
But do you know about if they're contemporary to this period in Europe or the Western world? Were any benevolent rulers modeled after, or not after, but comparable to this? Or is this a Chinese thing with these supposedly real benevolent rulers back then? Did we have any as good, as humble, as wise kings or emperors in Europe or in the Western world?
Nobody comes to mind contemporaneous with the Eastern Zhou period. But I'm sure
on the opposite side,
the great rulers are the people that are pointed to as, he was such a great king, or she was such a great ruler. When you look at when you strip it all down, they were good, decent. They treated the people well. They were modest and filled with virtue. So.
But on the opposite side of the spectrum, you had these real evil emperors at the same time. I don't remember their names.
You needed to point to them and say, look how terrible they were, and look at this horrible end that they came to, which was like what you could say about Donald Trump, where his detractors say, oh, what a horrible man. Look at this terrible end he's coming to in his, final weeks of office, and, just all this public scorn. And, you need the good to say that's the way you should be, and you need the bad to say that's the way you shouldn't be. So, every history has that. I'm sure in North heroes and villains.
Yeah, of course, we had the real brutal Viking overlords. But I wanted to give some examples for the listeners that haven't read the Bilderant or listened to all of your episodes. These really evil emperors the empire, also the Shou dynasty period. Examples of how the evil they did, just to get the.
Well, the classic one is always Zhou Xin, the last king of the Shang dynasty. He was this evil guy. He had an evil concubine, Dachi, and they were just would torture people and just squandered the wealth of the kingdom and were totally awful. And they went down in flames. And they are always this one king. Confucius had a field day with him, just showing how awful this guy was, and he's always pointed to as the example. And the King Jie, the last king of the mythical Xia, he was another one who was so horrible, but King Tang of the Shang overthrew him, and now you had out with this horrible and now in with this virtuous king, and then it's the so-called dynastic cycle, even though it wasn't an imperial dynasty, but king starts off good and does great things, and then later on it all goes downhill, and then the final king loses the mandate of heaven, the Tianming, which is something that came out of the Western Zhou, and that was the explanation as why this ruling house lost the favor of heaven, and therefore they had to go.
So they were overthrown. It was like popular revolts, or was it?
It's always, it's a popular revolt, and it's always a leader. They'll point to one person as someone who led, like Qin Shi Huang is the one who led and founded the Qin, and then you had Liu Bang who overthrew the Qin and founded the Han, and so on and so forth. And you have all these dynasty founders who we're famous for getting rid of.
What would it take to be overthrown? How much evil did you have to put out there to be actually faced with a popular revolt?
Natural disasters, popular unrest, revolts, things like that. Just things would just suddenly get out of balance, and there would be widespread suffering, and that was proof that and that the leaders weren't able to do anything about it, or they fiddled away while the place burned, like Nero, and then everything would just ultimately fall to pieces, and then some hero would come and sweep this old dynasty away, set up a new one, and then everything would settle down. And once again,
because in the Western media, often Chinese are portrayed as these very obedient people. They always listen to Xi Jinping. They do what they're told. But historically, this is maybe not the case. Huh?
Yeah, or else. Yeah, they better listen to what Xi Jinping says.
But historically, they're maybe not that obedient. They're
obedient. So many people. I mean, to us in the United States, we look at you not Norwegians, but Scandinavians. Say, God, what an obedient people. They're so nice. They're so polite. All good looking. It's just what you see on the outside. And with Chinese are like anywhere. They don't speak with one voice. They're all over the map. It's convenient to sort of group everyone together and sort of say, this is how they are. It just makes it easier to understand or get your arms around a culture or a people or a history. Just sort of simplify it.
Yeah. Simplified Chinese. Pinyin.
Yeah.
But then Confucius enters the scene, and then it gets really exciting. This is year...
Yeah, it was.
What year is this?
This was. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. 600. Yeah, it was a great time, and in Chinese history, I mean, certainly in philosophy, it was so many of the names, they all came out within like 100 years of each other. And, a lot of those books are still being read. Lao Tzu and Confucius, met, once or twice.
Yeah, but they're really different. Can you just talk a bit about the different characters that were?
Yeah, it's like comparing Taoism to Confucianism. Yeah, it's two different things. And Lao Tzu was concerned with the Tao. He wrote the Tao Te Ching, and just had no time for government or structure or any of these kinds of political things that Confucius was so, Confucius and all these other philosophers were, in the face of China, just a time of war and chaos, they were consumed with the question of how to fix this situation. What kind of a ruler do we need? What kind of a system is the best system? What works the best? How should a human act? How should we act towards each other? And, these are all just the classic questions, and they were all born out of this time of chaos and, sort of China on this, when the Zhou dynasty started, these three saints of Chinese history, the King Wen, his and his sons, King Wu, and the Duke of Zhou. I mean, these just the three most virtuous people from ancient Chinese history. And, during the time of Confucius, they would hearken back to those three and say, and also Yao, Shun, but these three, two kings, there were two kings, and then the Duke of Zhou, these were just so respected, and in Confucius's time, he said, that's really how we needed to be, like those guys. And they were held up as role models. But yeah, Confucius was consumed with the great issue of the day. Where do we go from here? I mean,
he had five points or five guidelines, wasn't that? I remember correctly. He's like,
I don't know. I have to go back and listen to the episode.
yeah, because you're researching and writing them. But he was concerned about how to treat your parents, how to treat your staff, and how to treat your colleagues, and how to be a virtuous. But Lao Tzu was more. He was more metaphysical in some way.
Yeah. Chinese philosophy, not so concerned with metaphysics that it is with humanism. They really were concerned. No. The concern was a human being's place in the world, in their family, in society, and whatnot, and how everybody should act with one another, how everyone should behave. That's what it was. That was very important.
Is this evident today? Can you when you meet Chinese people and talk to them, can you see traces of either Confucius or Lao Tzu, Taoism, Confucianism? Can you pinpoint the difference, or are some people more Taoist or?
Well, I don't know. Taoism is so tied in with nature. So all the religions that are around today, I mean, they all sort of have these same kinds of issues about, what's the, how should you act? What's the correct way to be, and whatnot.
So we take a great leap into the 18th century. I know we could talk a lot about all the emperors and stuff.
Right, but the Qing dynasty, huh?
Huh?
Yeah. Pretty much Qing dynasty to modern times is what I enjoy researching most and presenting those stories. because there's a lot of meat there. There's a lot of something you could grab onto in terms of sources, in terms of events that they're pretty well covered. There's no video, but you have a much better idea compared to Joe Dante. That could be anything. You just sort of have to take much on faith.
So if we're talking 19th century, where is this a good starting point? 19th
century,
or do you want to go earlier, like late 18th century? Where can you say that?
It began in 1644, and just your classic mandate of heaven type of dynasty. It started off great. You had benevolent emperors, and the country was strong, and they built out China's borders to its largest extent in history. And then right around just almost at the midpoint with the Qianlong Emperor, he was this emperor who just lived too long. You could say he's like Robert Mugabe, the guy wouldn't die. He lived too long, but so he got to witness China at its peak, and then sort of like in the last decade or so of his reign, China starts to turn the corner, which coincided with the rise of the European powers and the Industrial Revolution and all the all the advancements in navigation and shipbuilding and international trade. And then once the European powers start showing up on China's door, they sort of bust their way in, and that whole thing happened, which is also a very interesting history. But that coincides with China on its decline after it turned the corner. And
is that the century of humiliation, or is that the
century of humiliation? Is this sort of starts with the Treaty of Nanjing, 1842. So you're talking about from like the Treaty of Nanjing to the end of World War II. That's China's century of humiliation, which is still reverberating today, so strong, because a lot of what you see in China's, the way they act now, they keep that in mind, that hey, these son of a bitches were so brutal to us and did so much harm and pushed us around, and it was terrible. As an American, I can't relate to that. It's never happened to us. We've been down, but never been occupied, and we've never had foreign powers coming in here and knocking us around. So I don't have that. It's not part of my makeup, my American makeup. We don't have that. But in China, it may have been 150 years ago, but it's like it happened the other day. And something as terrible as what happened to China second half of the 19th century and certainly first half of the 20th century. They don't forget that so easy, and still want to make up for that humiliation, for that, really a century of humiliation. A century is a long time. And, when you read the stories, it's like, oof, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad.
Who was the main enemy? Was the British was the worst ones in their eyes, or the French, or
British, French, Japanese? Americans were not so. As Donald Trump once said about our country, we're not so lily white. We would like to believe in our American mentality that at least we weren't as bad as the British or French, but we didn't help so much. But we have a very proud legacy of what we achieved in China in terms of education, industry, and some of the cultural things that we passed on. We're not so bad.
And then we enter the 20th century, and this is where my modest knowledge where I have some modest knowledge, so I can ask some relevant questions. Where do you see the 20th century really kicked off? Is this Sun Yat-sen, the main fourth movement, or is it something before that?
Well, there was just the whole decay of the Qing dynasty, and they were just falling apart. And at the same time that the dynasty was just way past its sell-by date, and not very good at what they were doing, not very good at leading the country. At the same time, you had Japan and United States, European powers, just all over China, just doing whatever they wanted to do, and it was just it was a very rough time for China. I mean, to be Chinese today, with just everything that China's achieved in the past, forget about the last 100 years. Just look at the past 50 years, or even the past 25 years, all that China has achieved, and to have that as part of your legacy or part of your heritage, and then to look back in knowing what you know today, and then to look back and say, God, look how we were just thrown around and disrespected. I still think that it's still reverberating, and we're still paying that price. I mean, as an American, I could look back on some of the things that happened during that so-called century of humiliation, and just feel, oh God, I wish that hadn't happened. It's like, oh, why did they have to do this? Maybe in France, the French might say, oh, why did we have to sack that? And the British, Lord Elgin, and everything that happened with the sacking of the Summer Palace, and this horrible, horrible thing that was done. And now it's many years later, and China, is what it is today, and it in the face of modern times, to look back on those times, it's just so painful. It's like, oh, I wish we had done that. The famous bench somewhere in Shanghai, no dogs or Chinese allowed. There's just hundreds of examples of all these icons of just the abuse of foreign domination that we look back on today. It's like, ugh.
I think even we have that in the Tintin, the Tintin, the comic strip. Have you heard about that? The French comic strip, Tintin?
Oh, yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I remember Tintin in China. It's like no Chinese or dogs allowed, because the Japanese are running everything.
Yeah.
So what happened in 1910? Is it the Sun Yat-sen comes to power in 1910 or
1911? You had the Wuchang Rebellion down in Wuhan, and just sort of lit the fuse, and then one thing led to another, and the dynasty was overthrown, and that was the beginning of a really hard time for China. And republicanism really, it never had a chance, because from 1911, 1912, China was just a wreck, and Japan was already doing its thing, and the foreign powers that were all there, they still were a force that couldn't be defeated, and still did whatever they wanted to do. And then World War I, and then the betrayal at Versailles, and then
China also was betrayed.
Japanese invasion, and World War II, and then the Civil War. I mean, China didn't catch a break. It was just one decade after another of horror.
Because China also was betrayed in the Versailles Treaty. That's a bit undercommunicated.
Well, yeah, I episode on that about the China Labor Corps, and which was China's one of China's contributions during World War I. And some people say, well, these guys didn't carry a gun and they weren't out there killing, but it's like, well, somebody's got to pick up the bodies and bury them and bring all the stuff to the front. And, there's not one name from this China labor corps. There's no one standout that we could say, oh, he was, we remember him. They were just this faceless, nameless, just poor peasants, mostly from Shandong. And they came and they did this thankless task, and they're buried all over cemeteries, in Europe. And they really didn't get the recognition that they deserved. Of course, now people are, there's people have talking about them more, about their contribution, but and then because of the so-called Nishihara loans and some deal that some faction in China made with Japan, so then President Wilson and the powers that be, Lloyd George, Clemenceau, they said, oh well, Shandong province, we're not going to give it back. That used to be a German concession, it's going to have to go to Japan, not back to China. And that was like the whole point of it. I mean, sending the China Labor Corps and getting involved in World War I, it was a way for China to get in the game and, be a responsible power. And, when it was all over, it just was a slap in the face and led to events that led to where we are today. So, any Europeans that I talk to or Americans that bemoan communism and Mao and the Chinese Communist Party, it's like, hey, should have thought twice before you signed that Treaty of Paris in Versailles. Because so much of what happened that just laid the groundwork for the rise of communism. May 4th movement in 1919, and then 2 years later, you had the Communist Party, which is 100 years this year, July.
That's why we're talking. It's an anniversary. So the Communist Party. Now we're getting into the real meaty stuff. That my bookshop is filled with like 20 of my books. So it was a small event at first.
Wow, you ain't gonna make it with anyone anyhow.
It was a small event, the Chinese Communist Party in the beginning. It wasn't a big deal. It was like a couple of thousand, 10,000 members. The big guy on the block was another guy, Chiang Kai-shek, or how do you pronounce it? And it's different. They spell it differently in different books. Yeah.
Yeah, Chiang Kai-shek. Yeah, he's that's the I always call him Chiang Kai-shek in my podcast. Most people know that name. In Chinese, he's known as Jiang Jieshi or Jiang Zhongzheng. He's got other names too. Yeah, Chiang Kai-shek. Everybody heard that name. Like Sun Yat-sen. It's Sun Yat-sen. You don't know Sun Yat-sen. It's just history has recorded them. American history books.
Before we get into Mao, just a couple of sentences about Chiang Kai-shek. What kind of guy was he? What kind of a political leader? What defines Chiang Kai-shek?
A tragic figure because he didn't trust anybody. He was just always surrounded by enemies, and I feel bad for him. I just really, he didn't so much, he was part of history, but he couldn't make history like Mao made history. Chiang Kai-shek was sort of went along with it, was carried along by history. I haven't featured
almost outdone by his wife. Even she was almost more charismatic or more powerful.
Spoke English. She spoke English. It was easier to relate to, as an American or an English-speaking European. That was, she was educated in America, spoke very fluent English, all the Song sisters. And, so she, of course, because she was the one who spoke English, we remember her and the things she said. Chiang Kai-shek, he didn't speak English. Mao didn't either. So, it's easier to embrace them and relate to them. But it was just like a PR. She was just a PR department of Jiang's government. So,
but she met up with Roosevelt and
all the leaders, American, British. She was during the nationalist period and the Nanjing period, her and Chiang Kai-shek were the faces of China. So
I know you don't want to go back to the detailed accounts of any of your particular shows. I just want to tell my listeners, go and check out the show called The Story of John Service, The History of John Service. That's it's a fantastic tale of a diplomat, American embassy in China, different embassies. Was an American diplomat working both sides.
Yeah, I don't know if they had a 3-part or 4-part series on him, but yeah, two-way of looking at. Some people look at him as, oh, wow, he had this amazing life. And some people say, this guy was a rotten traitor. I mean, I have people that have, written to me and said, oh, really liked your series, but, I disagree. I think the guy should have been taken out and shot. And, he caused a lot of, he was like a gift to the communists. And, there's you could say that to a certain extent. I have a listener up in California, just turned 99 last year. His wife is 100. Wow. And he served in China during the time of John's service. So he was there in the 1940s as part of this whole foreign service in China, working, with the nationalists. And wow, it's just totally amazing. That was an amazing period. You could do the story of John's service. You could sort of get a feel for that, of the America sort of meeting the communists for the first time and sort of sussing them out and seeing and sort of weighing, who should we go with? Should we go with Jiang? Should we go with Mao? American policy said, got to join together and that'll be China. These guys could get together. It's like now you look at American politics. It's like, come on, just the Democrats and Republicans, just bring them together. Forget it. It's the line. There is just a force that keeps these two apart, and that's what it was with the communists and the nationalists. But yet we, in our naivete, thought that all you got to do is just get them to join together, fight Japan, defeat them, and then,
To be fair, was that the plan of the young Marshal? Wasn't he trying to?
Yeah, Zhang Xueliang. But he was killed very early on. Not Zhang Xueliang.
The listeners.
After Zhang Zuolin died, Zhang Xueliang.
He kidnapped Chiang Kai-shek.
Yeah, he tried to, force Chiang Kai-shek's hand, but in retrospect, we can look back at that and say, all he did was just make Mao more powerful. He just sort of cut Chiang Kai-shek off at the knees. He kept, Chiang Kai-shek, every time he just almost there, there would be some historical event or the Americans saying, oh, no, you got to do it this way. And so, it's easy now in 2021 to look back on the 1930s and 40s and say, oh, we shouldn't have done this or we should have done that. But back then, what did we know?
Have you contemplated making a series about all the other American people who were flying in and out of Shaanxi when Mao had this camp up there, like Edgar Snow and
the four foreigners who are interred at Babaoshan. Agnes Smedley and several of those friends of China who sort of were trying to explain the communists to the Americans and saying, they're not that bad. And what you could, with history, you could play the what if game till the time. And what if we embraced Mao? Mao wanted to join up with the U.S. He didn't want the Soviets. He chose them by default. It was that was who he had to go with because we would not accept him. But what if we did? What if that, might all the atrocities and everything that we've come to learn and hate about communism, would that have happened if we had, there's all these kinds of games you could play and these what ifs.
So I can't wait any longer. Let's get into Mao, because that's the real juice. Who was the young Mao? He was born in the Hunan province?
Yeah. Outside of Xiangtan, there's a little, I don't know if it's a village or a town, but Shaoshan, that's where he came from. And, he wasn't poor, but he wasn't rich. And he had he just ended up in Beijing, working at the library at Beijing University. And he knew, and he knew that the two founders of the Communist Party, or that are given credit for founding them, Li Dazhao, Chen Duxiu, and he worked in the library there, and that was his introduction. And like I said, after the Treaty of Versailles and the whole May 4th movement, he was in on that. I mean, he was swept up in that, like that whole generation of leaders, Zhou Enlai included. That were just impacted by the May 4th movement. And
but he didn't go to Europe to study like many others. He didn't
go anywhere.
Went to Paris.
Was not a very well-traveled guy. He went to the Soviet Union. That was it.
Yeah, once.
He was only, I think he flew on a plane once in his life. To fly to Chongqing to meet with Ambassador Hurley. He was not a very well-traveled, worldly kind of a guy, but he read, he talked with people from all over the world, and he was very worldly in his own way, as worldly as one.
Because he was obviously not stupid, even though he had this very quirky guy, you can say. That if he wasn't an American comedy or something, he would be like the super quirky guy in the.
Yeah, he had his things about him, but the way communism worked, there's got to be one guy in charge, and everybody follows him. At all, always. There's no deviation from the party line, which comes from the top. And
some people have likened Trump to Peter Sellers in Mr. Chance, the gardener, the Being There, the movie.
One of my favorite movies. Yeah.
But isn't Mao a bit of a Chinese Chancellor Gardener also? He's like. I mean, he makes his own fortune, obviously, but also stumbles upon. I mean, the rivalry with Wang Ming in the beginning.
It's just a classic rise. It's a classic, rise to the top. He had his rivals and his detractors, and he fought them all off. And he had a nice core team. He had Zhou Enlai, one of the greats of modern history, as sort of a right-hand man. I mean, you got Zhou Enlai standing behind you, watching your back, you almost can't fail. So, that's one of the things that people criticize. They'll say, okay, Zhou Enlai, this great man, but he was Mao's enabler. So, his greatness or his glory is diminished in the eyes of some for how he really was the one who allowed Mao
but
to...
also to be enabled. But also Kang Sheng, you mentioned him a lot in many of your shows. He was like the dark, like the almost like a Himmler or something, like the Gestapo chief.
He was an intellectual who early on joined up with Chairman Mao. He was the one that introduced Mao to Jiangqing. And so he's a very early on another enabler for Mao, who used his ways to allow Mao to get as big as he did.
But he was a classical evil Nazi type, like with expensive art all over his place, and he enjoyed torturing people.
Yeah, he was known for that too. He was an intellectual. Him and Mao, would trade off poems, and they were just they were close. Yeah, he was very loyal.
That's paradoxical with Mao. He hates intellectuals, but he's also a very well-read guy. He loves reading.
He was an intellectual. He was a philosopher. He was a poet. He was a very literary guy. Very literary. I mean, even today, I wouldn't call myself that well versed in that. But yeah, people will say, "Oh yeah, Mao's poems," and they'll recite them. And yeah, he really was good. I can't say for sure.
Bomb the headquarters. It's good slam poetry. So, what went wrong with Mao? What was he paranoid? Was it? We talked about Trump earlier. Is it his personality? Is it machinations?
He knew how to foment revolution. One of the things about Maoism is you never sit still. You had to keep doing revolution. You can never stop. Otherwise, you became like the nationalists, or became like you would become complacent, and you always had to have struggle and within society and deal with all these contradictions. And he wasn't too strong in economics, and he knew how to create revolution. He wasn't very good at running the country, and the running the country part he didn't like that because to do that requires bureaucracy and stability and things that he didn't like. He said, once you did that, then you're no better than the people that we overthrew. People will just overthrow us. So, his two, prior to the Great Leap Forward, he had all these destructive campaigns, destructive to the lives of people, not so much the economy, but with the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, those are his two signature, campaigns that, he's famous for. And, from an economic point, it wasn't a very good idea.
He had a lot of quirky schemes as well as those two, like get rid of flies and mice and sparrows, and the five evils campaign, or I don't remember the exact term, but
yeah, there were so many.
He had a dark creativity, dark quirky creativity when it comes to policy ideas.
Yeah, so part of the whole communist thing in China, the way it is, if he says it, you got to do it. There's no, well, let's debate it in the House first, and there's none of that debate. He says, do this, you have to do it. And regardless of whether you knew it was going to destroy the country, you had to do it. That's the directive that came from on high. And, he turned himself, during the Great Leap Forward, and especially during the Cultural Revolution, he turned himself into a kind of a godhead figure. And
but he was a petty god. He was a petty person. He was like small squabbles with. Have you read the book, the Doctor? Is she? Oh, my Chinese is so bad. The Mao's Doctor. The book.
Yeah, I read that book when it came out. I read it when it came out, and yeah, that was one of these first ones to like expose all his warts and these terrible things.
All his petty squabbles with it reminds me of the guy in high school who's like the prince at the ball. Everybody loves him. Whatever he says, everyone's gonna do. And he meets this one nerd in the corner who says something like your shoes are ugly or something. And this guy has it all. And he's like spending so much energy in taking revenge on this nobody. That's Mao. He's like,
that's Mao.
This doctor,
he didn't like anyone to disagree with him, And in the Great Leap Forward, and prior to the Great Leap Forward, anti-rightist campaign, in the 100 Flowers movement that preceded that, and all of those campaigns sort of conditioned people to know, okay, don't disagree with him, just sort of go along with whatever he says. And then, when the Great Leap Forward happened, even though everyone knew it was destroying the country and that millions of people were dying, nobody would come out and say, well, Chairman Mao, you shouldn't really do this. It's really screwing up the country. What they had to do was say, oh, Chairman Mao, what a great idea. Look how great. And, they'd falsify figures. And when Mao would go tour the country, they'd, take him to all these, like Potemkin villages where, everything was great. And then Mao would say, you see, what a great idea this Great Leap Forward was. And finally, when, after 40 million people died, or however many, it's tens of millions, and there was one of the worst famines in modern history when Peng Dehuai, who was Mao's contemporary and was actually born, just grew up also not too far from where Mao grew up. They were both from Hunan, and they were old comrades, and they came up the ranks together. And Peng Dehuai, was just always a loyal soldier, for Mao. So we figured, I know this guy from way back. I could speak to him in my Xiang dialect, of Hunan. And when he spoke up and said, in a private letter to Mao, and said, hey, some mistakes were made. We shouldn't have done this. We shouldn't have done that. And look what happened to him. Mao just plowed him under. Just one of his closest from way back. And, when that happened, after Peng Dehuai was thrown under the bus, and everyone knew, keep your mouth shut. Do not say anything, even if you're right, like Peng Dehuai was right. But
that was the Lushan conference.
Shut the hell up.
That was the Lushan conference.
Yeah.
1959. Yeah. And then you had this. High Ray dismissed from office deal.
Okay, so Mao, all right, he had to sort of step back. The country was in shambles, so Deng Xiaoping and Liu Shaoqi and all that, these other leaders sort of came forward and got the country back up off its knees, and and everything was starting to fall into place, and economic, agricultural statistics, everything was improving. But Mao didn't like being sidelined. He thought, I screwed the whole country up with my stupid Great Leap Forward, and all these guys, now the country's coming back. I didn't have anything to do with it. he didn't like that. And that was really how the whole Cultural Revolution started. Hai Rui dismissed from office, that play by Wu Han, that was just like something that somebody seized on and said, Chairman Mao, look at this play. It's all about a virtuous official who's telling the emperor, he shouldn't do this and shouldn't do that. That's Peng Dehuai criticizing you. So this play that's being, that people are seeing, it's an allegory. It's an anti-Mao Zedong allegory, and you got to stop this. And, that's how Mao started to come back. I mean, that was the beginning.
And this was the first scheme, really big scheme that his wife was involved in, Jiang Xing, with taking apart this,
because
she should get some more attention in a bad way, maybe, but
Kang Sheng introduced her, she was a B movie actress and totally not what people perceived as a revolutionary. She was considered this bourgeois Shanghai actress. How can you, Chairman Mao, take a, he had to divorce his wife, who was, like a saint. People would admired her. And so part of the deal was, that Mao said, okay, well, I'm going to marry her, but, she won't be involved in any politics at all. We're sort of just going to keep her to the side. And all these years, 40s, 50s, and into the 60s, she always stayed on the sidelines. And, she was somebody who she had her own opinions and thoughts. And she was just a petty, wicked person. And once Mao found a use for her to attack his enemies, that's when she emerged and, did everything that she did everything she did during the Cultural Revolution, being part of the Gang of Four or the Gang of Five, as some people call it, with Mao being the fifth one. But yeah.
And after the Hai Rui dismissed from office affair, that's when it really kicked. That's when the snowball really starts rolling.
Mao started, and when people weren't giving him the response he wanted, that's when he started, unleashing.
Because he was not even in Beijing in Shanghai, because all the book the doctor wrote, most of the stories in Shanghai, in the political, in the Kremlin of Beijing. But in the months and weeks and days before the Cultural Revolution, Mao relocated. He didn't like to be in Beijing when he was scheming.
He loved Hangzhou. Hangzhou. that was his favorite place. He had a villa there.
A bit like Stalin did the same thing. He always went down to the Black Sea or whatever to plot his schemes and to instigate some guy committing suicide, pushing people out or whatever. They had the same. They hated each other, Stalin and Mao, or distrusted each other, but they had the same temperament in some ways. So Mao was out and about. He was on his private train with all his staff swimming around.
Yeah, his famous swim across the Yangtze at Wuhan.
Wuhan again. Wuhan is always in the middle of something.
Just such an underrated city. Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou, those places get all the publicity. But Wuhan is really not just in modern Chinese history, but going all the way back to ancient times. It's always such a historic city. I mean, Wuhan is three cities. It's a Hanyang, Hankou, and Wuchang. So combined together, they call it Wuhan.
If you're a conspiracy theorist, it's easy to jump to a conclusion that, of course, they made the virus in Wuhan. It has such a symbolic value. It's where he started to swim. It's where the big fight in the Cultural Revolution.
1911, that overthrew the dynasty. It started in Wuhan. So yeah, famous, great. I've been there many times. Great city. Oh, beautiful. so historic.
And now everyone hates the city, unfortunately.
I don't know. I mean, it has this reputation, but we'll never know. I mean, it's like everyone's investigating, where did this virus actually begin, and it's like, well, we're never going to find out. Damn vaccine.
So he's out swimming. He's out swimming and scheming and plotting, and it's
took that swim. Everybody, hey, I still got it. I've been pushed to the sidelines and blamed for the great leap forward, but now I'm making a comeback. And he took that swim, and I mean, that's not a little creek. I mean, that is a big river. It's very wide at that point, and he was so for him to go do that at his age, it was sort of a symbolic act that Mao let it went on the front page of the People's Daily, and now Mao was going to make his comeback. He had been saying he had been giving orders, and he was not being respected. People were like, yeah, just sort of, yeah, okay,
blah blah blah.
But nobody was really following through. So after he took that swim, and then after he went back up to Beijing and started bellowing, that's when everybody sort of knew.
And he had his main enemy in his sights, but no one else understood who he was going after.
Yeah,
he was
going after
to take
the whole bureaucracy, the whole leadership.
But first and foremost, Li Shaoqi, right?
Liu Shaoqi, Deng Xiaoping. Peng Zhen was the first one to get to be torn down. He was mayor of Beijing. He was a major figure in the government and in the party. And after Peng Zhen fell, it's like, gee, if somebody like Peng Zhen could be made fast work of, it's where all of us are not safe. And that's when everyone sort of figured out, gee, we better hop on this.
These are grand poobahs. These are not like small timers, Peng Shan and those guys. They're big guys.
Small timer. I mean, he was a major guy, as mayor of Beijing, party boss. He was a major figure. So when he fell, just because Chairman Mao wanted him to fall, I mean, everyone knew, gee, if they got Peng Zhen, I'm not safe either. I better watch what I'm doing. So, after Peng Zhen fell, Liu Shaoqi, Deng Xiaoping, all those guys, Yang Shankun, they all knew. Better tread.
Apart from Mao, it kind of started at the Tsinghua University, right? It was all the events at the university with the character posters. How did it come about? Was it Mao all along? Was it pulling the strings, or was it some kind of a?
It was like what I said earlier, how Trump used Twitter to go direct to the people. Mao used these big character posters to go direct to in the universities, and he said bombard the headquarters, and he just started saying all these things that said to students that it's okay to attack your universities and the principal university and your professors, and teach these guys, put them in their place. And students were like, oh, great. I could go these symbols of authority. Chairman Mao said it's okay to, rough them up, do whatever you want, kill them if you want, whatever. And then, it went from there. It started off, in the universities, and then it went into the government. When I say the government, I mean,
how chaotic did it get? Can we comprehend how much chaos it's manifested through these years? Can we is it possible to?
Nobody went to school, closed down the schools, closed down factories. People just took a break from life and had to just show your enthusiasm, just unadulterated enthusiasm for anything that Chairman Mao said. And so, the economy tanked. Zhou Enlai behind the scenes sort of kept the country from going down the toilet. But that was a lot of work to keep China from just from self-destruction while Mao was doing, all his things and, trying to get everybody excited about, his big thoughts on how, the country should be.
Smashing the four olds and all that kind of stuff. And it was easy for, if some student organization or some band of students branded you as a class enemy, you were finished.
Yeah, it's like classroom. It's like these guys that went into the Capitol the other day and just smashed the place up. I mean, that's essentially, what Chairman Mao said. It's like, yeah, it's okay, go ahead and do this. And they, just go around destroying things. They just walk into party headquarters or government buildings, all over in all the major cities, and just would go in and start smashing things up. And they take the party boss and they put a dunce hat on his head and, airplane the guy and just humiliate him and degrade him. And it was everybody was fair game. If you were not, if you exhibited any kind of reservation about anything that Chairman Mao said, you were just branded, you were fair game to be taken down, and not just you, your whole family. So
it's very uncanny when you look at the situation now that Twitter and those kind of platforms enable, both on the far right and the far left. Once you're branded Sanders fundamentalist or Trump fundamentalist or racist, or once it's out there on Twitter, you're finished.
Yeah,
you can lose your job. And how can we not learn from what happened in China in the 60s? It's history repeating, isn't it?
Yeah, you could read the history books and listen to the China History Podcast, but it's not the same as going to somebody in China and having them tell you their personal experiences during the Cultural Revolution and some of the things that happened to them, happened to their parents. I mean, it's horrible when you drill all the way down to the individual stories and the lives that were just ruined. Then you could really get a sense of how deep the destruction was. It wasn't just destroying the four olds. It was just destroying society, and such a horrible period. I'm trying to think. I talked about, our American Cultural Revolution. It was nothing compared to that in China. I just draw a couple parallels and say, Chinese Cultural Revolution, American Cultural Revolution. There's just some things you could say, well, this was similar, that was similar. But what happened in China was just the individual.
It's a slippery slope when you start branding people online and saying this guy is that, or this woman is she supported this policy and she's a reactionary, or she's a class enemy. It's not so far away from what's starting happening now.
Donald Trump don't come around that often, where you have this, wow, where did this guy come from? That are able to have this charisma or this connection with a great mass of people. It's like a lot of good can be done, but in the case of Mao, at least, a lot of bad was done, and it took the country, so many years to dig themselves out. But dig themselves out, they did. And look at China today. That's why I say, America, everyone all over the world, have a good laugh. We're not infallible. We could look stupid as the next country, but I truly believe, just as China came back, the United States is going to come back too. And believe me, China was in a lot worse shape than the United States was. They didn't have our debt, but they were in a lot worse shape throughout society than the United States was. So
to be a middle-class Chinese person today, how's it like? You meet a lot of these people in your work, and How's the
You know,
the China dream? How's the China?
First of all, the young people of today do not hit. When I say young, I mean people that are under 20. Very little understanding of Chinese history and about all the things that we're talking about. Saying, oh, these terrible things that happened. They don't know about that. There's it's enough of anything that paints the nation in a bad light is suppressed. And when you try and have a conversation, I had a conversation with my company. They sent over some guy. This is before COVID, to work on some project. Something needed to be done, so they sent this kid from the department, in China. He was like 23 years old, and we're working, and I'm telling him, you study Chinese history? Go, oh yeah, I love Chinese history, and so we got on the subject of the Cultural Revolution. Yeah, I said, a lot of people suffered and died. And this kid literally said, what? People died during the Cultural Revolution? He had no idea. So, it's like, oh, God, this is probably all pervasive throughout China. Like people really have no idea. June 4th, anything that makes that we in the West say, oh, look at that. China's so bad for this reason. Nobody knows. That's just swept under the rug. And if it doesn't serve the party's purpose, it doesn't deserve to be taught in the schools. So, two ways.
Xi Jinping is Xi Jinping is a benevolent ruler or a evil thought maker?
Too early to tell. If I was Xi, I would never be able to sleep at night. China is very good at saying, look at me, look at this, how great this is, look at how great that is, look at us compared to you. And, they're very good at that. And they're also very good at, not letting anything that paints them in a bad light get out. And there's just this never-ending argument between, China, the people that are pro-China and people that are, very, very critical of China. But he's still walking on, as great as his position looks right now, China's still got a lot of problems that it's like any one of them could sink the country. But he's, with the Belt and Road Initiative and all these big plans, it's like, hey, if it works out, he's going to go down in history as truly one of the great world figures in history. But he's still in the beginning. He's still in the beginning phase.
Because I read his biography, and one thing I picked up on was I think that I don't know if it was Trump they were talking about. I think that's too early. But the way they look at the American political system, it's incomprehensible that the guy can come from business without any political credentials. I mean, Xi Jinping, he was sent down as a youth. He worked. He paid his dues all the way up. It's pure speculation, but what do you think Xi Jinping says about Trump and the American political climate when the mic's off, when he's free to speak his mind? How do you think?
Jinping says, "Oh my God, this is just totally getting out of hand. I mean, every time they slug us, we got to slug them back, but this is not good for us." In China, they call Trump 川建国. Chuan stands for Trump, and Jianguo means to build the country. So they call Trump this guy that's doing nothing but helping to build China. And, he's the greatest thing to happen to China since Confucius. And, he's by all his policies, all he's doing is building up China. That's one way of looking at it. But on the other hand, in the United States may be down right now, but they're still damn powerful and, around the world. And I'm sure Xi Jinping would rather be not fighting with the United States than fighting. I mean, the fighting, it's great, builds you up and makes you look tough. But on the other hand, it's not good for the long term and or even in the short term. So this will be very interesting to see what happens now that we push the Trump administration aside and now we have sort of a fresh start. But it could never go back to the way it was, because if there's one thing that Trump did, he sort of woke American people up. And, people that never sort of considered it before now sort of know a little bit more than they did before. So I think people that like didn't give a shit about China before now have this terrible hatred of China. You hear it in just common people on the street. And, even the most ignorant of the masses out there, will just have this terrible anti-China feeling. And then, you have people like me and people who are close with China, speak the language and have a China career, or they're married to a Chinese spouse, or they're a reporter or a China expert or an academic or whatnot. Even these people who were your base to always build, who are always there to say, U.S.-China relations, you got to constantly preserve it and grow it. And, we're the most, we're the greatest soldiers of promoting China and promoting U.S.-China relations. Even these guys, they say they don't say very complimentary things anymore. So the feeling about China in the United States now changed under Trump. It turned a corner, and you have a very strong anti-China feeling that's sort of out there in society, which is like when I was growing up in the 60s. It's like that with the Soviet Union, So it's like, Soviet Union, wow, what a terrible bunch of people they are. I grew up with that. I used to watch, the old cartoons, Bullwinkle and Rocky the Squirrel. Did they ever show that in Norway? The bad guy, his name was Boris Badenov, and he spoke with a Russian accent. Hollywood, we just copied all these movies, and if you were a bad guy, you spoke with a Russian accent. So growing up, it's like, damn Soviets, Russian, what terrible people they are. That's sort of like what's happening now in China, is you have this anti-Chinese feeling. So I think Biden is not going to be able to go back to the way it used to be, like under Obama. Like, whatever China wants, as long as it keeps things friendly, So I don't know where it's going to go.
But you met many Chinese people and hang out with I guess you have Chinese colleagues or maybe even friends. How are they as people? I've been there, but it's 16 years ago. The average Chinese colleague, friend you meet, have a dinner. How would you describe? All people are people, of course, but
people in China, I never lived there. I never lived in China. I lived in Hong Kong. Hong Kong's not China.
Oh, okay.
And Hong Kong Chinese, at least in the 90s when I was living there, were not the same as people, mainland people who lived in mainland China. So, the ones that I talk to, people in my company and other people I've come to know in China, they don't really have opinions. They're just so busy, cashing in on, all the strength of China's economy and enjoying these nice things and enjoying, all the glory of, China's position now in the world. So they don't really, no one ever that I speak to in China and criticizes.
they're not on Twitter all day long tweeting about political issues and caring about who's
not the ones
elected or from.
Yeah, if you
Can you see?
If you interview someone else like Kaiser Kuo, who knows so many people in China, you get a much better answer. But for me, I don't really know that many people there. I haven't been there since 2016, and I never lived there. I just went there a lot. And it's, going there on a 10-day business trip is not the same as living there. So
but it's comfortable to travel there now. It's prosperous. You can see it, or is it that a myth? Is it still hutong buildings and stale rice in the corner?
When you go to all the big cities, what you see is, what you see. Looks great. 1.4 billion people. And I think the last I heard, there's still, 60 million people who live in extreme poverty. I don't know. For me, with my personal experience, even when I go to, if I'm in, some city in China, it's like, oh God, I never want to live here. And, it's just my personal feeling. But yeah, it's my Chinese colleagues, they're very proud of China's position today. And, they should be. It's a great accomplishment. The story of China and of the Chinese people, like with the series I do it on the Thai Chinese, wherever they are in the United States, they're just a special people. And, I just have always embraced that culture. And they're happy. People in China are happy to be enjoying what they're enjoying.
The food, and the food is great, and it's more than just the what you get at the European or American Chinese restaurant. It's so much more.
Culture is great. I'm not going to say I love China. I love Chinese culture. So I have to be a fan of China or Chairman Mao or Xi Jinping or whatever. I'm in it for the culture. I'm not. I think China's. I think it's an enemy of the United States as much as the Soviet Union is, but still got to find a way to work.
And obviously, because of China's position in the world and the strength of China right now, and even just because of it's the humanitarian way to go about it, we should educate ourselves about China and Europe and the United States. What do you think about
That's what I say.
The level of
I totally agree. And that's why with the China History Podcast, that's all I'm trying to do. I'm just throwing it out there. If you've listened to my shows, I don't throw any politics in there. You never hear me throwing these snarky statements or pro-Trump or anti-this. Or it's purely just about the history and teaching it in the most relatable way possible, so that people could learn about China. And that's what I'm saying. If you're going to hate China, at least hate them from some sort of base, from some sort of understanding, a foundation of understanding. Yeah. Say, okay, I've studied them. Terrible people. I hate them. At least do it from an educated perspective. People, you listen to people get interviewed on TV or on something, they'll just say the most foul thing. And it's like, well, what are you basing that on? It's like, they're that's why I'm saying educate yourself first.
But are you optimistic that when it comes to the knowledge about China and, for instance, the United States? Is it getting better? Do you see any improvement, or is it stupid people on TV all the time?
It's, I always say, gee, in the early 80s when I was fresh out of college, with my Chinese degree and, looking for a job in China, I just remember, it's like I used to cut out articles from the newspapers and save them, because it's like, something about China. It's like, oh, wow, there's an article about China in the paper today. You get like a few a week, maybe, if you were lucky. And no, I would speak Chinese. It's like, oh my God, a white guy speaking Chinese. Well, how rare is that? It's like, but now it's so common. I mean, I see people all the time. It's taught in high schools now, and in college. And when I was studying Chinese in college, it was like 2 people in my class, 3 people. I mean, it was like 25 on the first day, but after 1 week, all the attrition, people say, threw in the towel quickly. But now, the classrooms are full, and people are studying Chinese history, and on the internet, you have so many resources that teach about China. It's not like the olden days where you had to like glean through so much just to get a basic understanding. And they had experts that weren't even that. They took 1 trip to China and they wrote a book, and that. But now there is so much available. There are so many podcasts and websites and cultural exchanges, educational exchanges, these Confucius institutes, and China's a big deal. People are studying it more. So yeah, it's no comparison. People are much wiser about China.
I have a funny anecdote again. We're starting to draw close to the end here, but I was in rehab a couple of years ago, and it was when Huawei was on the up. Really on the up, and I had an old iPhone, and the guy next to me was an amphetamine user, really strung up guy, anabolic steroids, big guy, not very educated, but he was like, "What the fuck are you doing with an iPhone? You got to get an Huawei. Don't you know the Chinese people are so much smarter now?" So even random people, I mean, like whatever, drug addicts, or it's.
Yeah. When I say
catching on
China than ever before, it's like, yeah, but most
how can
ignorant.
How can you have an American phone? Are you stupid? How can you not have a Chinese phone? So last question. For us China history lovers, China enthusiasts, not academics, but people who want to educate ourselves, where to start? It's a big country. It's a big history for young people out there maybe listening to my show or your show. Where should you begin with the
Well, it depends. You want to book, or do you want to listen to a podcast, or you want to self-study from a website, or what kind of instruction, how, where do you want to learn? I think a podcast is the best medium. I mean, you could listen to it when you are napping, or you want to go to sleep at night, or you're exercising, or you're sitting around in your office and you have the kind of job where you can listen to these kind of programs all day long. It just depends how you want to do it. I always think, gee, this is a China History Podcast. It's a great place to start because, it's a thematic show. Tonight will be the 265th episode. They're all different. I mean, I have some multi-part series, but it's all just different kind of subjects so that, people who want to learn a little bit about China, it's like this one, that one, I'm not that interested in that, or I don't really care about philosophy so much, or poetry, but, I want to know Cultural Revolution, what's that? Or, Deng Xiaoping, always heard of him. So I think with the China History Podcast, there's all kinds of stuff in there that I think could be relatable and can give people that base of understanding. You're not going to get a PhD listening to the China History Podcast. It's not meant to be an academic show. It's Chinese history for the masses, and but the experts listen too, and that's a good place to get a nice, no pressure understanding, and just how we've been talking for the past hour. That's pretty much how
I love it. I love it. That was a bit of a bad connection, so I hope it fixes itself in the edit. I think it does, but sometimes the sound fell out, so I was kind of interrupting you because I didn't hear you were saying anything. But I hope it works out. But one last question. I just thought about Chinese podcasts. Do you think it's a future? Do you think we can get some really interesting podcasts out of China anytime soon, like history
English
podcasts?
Are you talking about English language?
Yeah, whatever. I mean, for me, it would be better if it was in English, but
Like practically a new one every day. I mean, I'm so busy doing my own, but all of a sudden, just last week, I looked and I go, holy cow! There's like 4 or 5 brand new Chinese history podcasts.
No, I'm talking about made by Chinese.
Oh yeah, are you kidding? They're more than us. I mean, they have an app in
English. In English.
No. Yeah, they're all Chinese. They have Himalaya, which is their platform in China, where people just, have. It's the same thing as it's essentially we call it a podcast. They call it I don't know, a jubo or whatever they call them, but it's essentially a podcast. It's audio by demand.
Because what I'm craving is young Chinese people putting out podcasts, movies, whatever that are even either translated into English or they speak English. When can we see that happen? Like the young people in China pushing out culture our way in English, so we can get to learn about them from their own experience. Like,
yeah, it's a dark for what you're talking about. It's a dark age in China right now. You got to be damn careful what you say. Not only what you say, but your own WeChat. Somebody speaking to you. Yeah, sometimes I'll be having a WeChat conversation with some colleague and we'll get on some political issue and, they like, they don't want to talk about that because they're so afraid someone's monitoring their feed and, they don't want to get a knock on the door and say, hey, what were you talking about with this American guy? It's very dark time. You have to be careful what you say.
Because when I was in China in 2004, I made a documentary about these 2 girls, one drug addict from Xinjiang province and one author, punk rock girl. And I asked her, what is punk for you? And she actually answered Mao was a real punk. That was real punk. So that says something about the level of obedience. If she's still 2004, she thought Mao was the Sid Vicious of the East.
Yeah,
maybe it was in some ways.
People love him, some people hate him. It just all depends on what your life experience was. I mean, if you family got plowed under because of Mao, then you're not going to like him too much. But depending on where you are in society, people look to him and say, oh, those were the good old days. Now, there's such a wealth gap and, there's no hope down at this level of society. And, back when Mao was around, everybody was the same. People harken back to this age. But, you got to be freaking careful what you say in China.
However you slice it, China is not going anywhere. So keep posting those episodes. Keep listening to...
I'm never going to stop. I'm going to retire. I'm trying to, I'll keep doing this till the day I die. It's so pleasurable, the whole process of doing it, and just the emails I get and the nice comments I get on, various platforms. And yeah, it's so self-satisfying, and to connect with people from all over the world and share their stories with me. I love it. It's just, I love doing it. And as long as it's still well received, I'll keep doing it until I pass from this world.
So, Laszlo, fantastic to connect with you. Fantastic to talk with you. Good luck with your binge all the new episodes. I hope to see you in Norway soon. We can, in Norway it's a lot of interesting China academics, especially from the revolutionary period. We had a strong Maoist contingent here, so come visit us and you can meet all those strange quirky professors who went and shake hands with Mao in the 60s, 70s. You would love it.
Yeah, when I was living in Hong Kong, I worked for a manufacturer. We sold just a shitload of photo albums to to importers in Norway. And I became very close with a friend there. His name is Vigar. And, he was the greatest citizen ambassador of Norway, and really put all this love that I have for Norway, this hat that he gave me, this hat. And he was just a great citizen ambassador. I have so much respect for your country. And so all his friends that I got to meet, whenever they'd come to Hong Kong, and just one was better than the next. And I just have such positive vibes about Norway. And, Vigar would say, hey, come on and visit me. He had this nice cottage in Fredrikstad, and sometimes you could stay here and we'll have fun. I'll show you everything. And I never.
You're very welcome.
I just wrote to Vigar the other day. I'm coming, man.
You're still welcome. I hope you visit me. And as a ex Los Angeles citizen, I have to say you also are a very good ambassador for a city I'm pretty ambivalent about, I have to admit. Great to have you on, Laszlo. I hope to talk to you again, make a sequel in 6 months or something. Good luck. Yep. And what do you say in China when you log off? In Chinese?
What's that? Oh, what's that?
To say goodbye. Goodbye in Chinese, what do you say to the listeners in Chinese?
再见，朋友们。
再见。